Ecological Society of Australia, featuring ecologists from all over the country.
The biodiversity in this part of the world is just incredible.
It's not just ice and snow, it's teeming with life on the coast.
I see that and I say, okay, well, that's a great opportunity to study it more.
Looking at those sites gives you a sense of joy and hope.
Love being around. It's incredible.
It's just, it's a really awesome program, and it's just so healing, like, for our whole community.
That's the beauty of ecology, is that it's so interconnected.
Yeah, it's been really exciting, actually.
Bats are the second most diverse order of mammals in Australia and around the world, and provide vital ecosystem services like pest control and pollination. But more than 30% of bat species are threatened, largely due to habitat alteration and introduced predators. In this episode, PhD student Oli Aylen joins us to discuss this fascinating group of animals and to outline his research on the role of fenced conservation reserves on bat communities in arid zones. Can you explain to me exactly why you got interested in bats themselves?
Yeah, definitely. I get asked that a lot. Moving to New Zealand about 14 years ago and doing my undergraduate in Dunedin, a lot of people obviously love birds in New Zealand. I don't tell anyone, but I'm not a huge birder. And I just found out that bats are New Zealand's only terrestrial mammal, which most people don't know, even a lot of Kiwis. And I just found them fascinating and started reading a lot about them. Started to write all my assignments on them at uni when you sort of get more freedom. I then, to be honest, got quite the reputation for it. Got the nickname Batman and just sort of stuck with it. I then got the opportunity to go to Borneo for my master's research and met a bat researcher over there, and just the diversity of bats in Borneo is phenomenal. And I also really like gadgets, so you get to do a lot of gadgets with bioacoustics, and I built a basic reference library for the bats in Brunei, which is a small part of Borneo. I just think they're fascinating, and they're often overlooked. They have a lot of negative perceptions. I think 3 questions I get asked is why bats, COVID-19 and rabies, and that's pretty much how the conversations always go. So I just find them fascinating, and I really enjoy taking photos of them as well to sort of show people how cute and really nice they are as animals.
And why are they important in terms of ecosystem function?
Yeah, definitely. So it's been looked at quite a bit. They are excellent bioindicators of ecosystem health, being very reliant on moisture, invertebrate availability. So you can actually look at degraded landscapes and the community of bats. They're also nectivorous bats, very important for pollination. Things like agave, tequila, we wouldn't have without bats. There's pest control. So that's been valued at several $1 billion in the US for pest control. And that's something that we're looking at in Australia as well, with cotton farms, also some vineyards. So they have those sort of economic benefits as well. And then the fruit bats, the flying foxes, of course, are really important for seed dispersal. So they have actually got quite a bit of good press following the fires and a lot of the the forest die-off, that they are actually so important for reforesting and seeding those species.
And are they numbers are declining?
Yeah, so grey-headed flying foxes are threatened. The little reds seem to be doing okay, but there are numerous conservation threats. Generally, actually, in Australia, the threats to bats seems to be lower than other small mammals, but again, they don't get as much attention, and obviously, a lot of them, such as in the arid zone, just don't get much research at all. But generally, they're actually holding on fairly well.
What sort of threats are they facing?
Yeah, so most of the threatened bat species in Australia are cave dependent. So mining has had a big impact. So a species like the southern bent-winged bat, which gets luckily quite a bit of attention, but they are, I think, critically endangered. Things like the ghost bat, which is a phenomenal bat, eat other bats, very, very cool. They used to have a much larger range, and now they're sort of just survive in a few remnant populations, and some of the populations in Queensland are down to literally a few individuals. And then, of course, habitat destruction, which is pretty much for every species, but they do rely on, most bats actually roost in trees, which most people think of caves when they think of bats, but because they are reliant on these long-lived trees to create tree hollows, just like gliders and everything else, habitat destruction is a massive thing. And of course, people put out bat boxes, but only a few species will really use them. And it can take years for them to start using them. So, yeah.
And you're focusing on bats for your PhD. Can you explain, give us a 5-minute synopsis of what you're focusing on with your PhD?
Yeah, sure. So I'm looking at fence conservation reserves, which is something I'm really interested in. And obviously these are really highly successful for species such as bilbies and bettongs and those sorts of things. But nobody has looked at whether they could potentially be a conservation measure for bats. So I have sort of 4 chapters. Initially, I'm looking at spatial and temporal use of the reserves, using very large bioacoustic arrays, which areas are important, doing vegetation assessments. So we would think, or our hypothesis is, because these areas have had feral herbivores removed, they've also have large macropods removed, there will be increased vegetation, increased recruitment of tree species. So by using the bioacoustics, we can see which areas are important, and then through time as well. So a long-term data set through droughts and that sort of boom-bust arid system. Then also looking at roosts and refugia. So like I said, they need these old trees for hollows, or one of them just wedges itself in behind the bark. But they take a long time to form. So are there more inside? Where are they? And then also the thermal tolerance. So how much protection are they getting from these roosts? And if they only have maybe younger trees with, smaller cavities, etc., does this impact how much protection they have from these extreme heat events getting over sort of 44 degrees? And then looking at resources as well. So of course invertebrates are really important. Not my specialty, but I'm learning. I've just had a grant from Bat Conservation Trust in the UK to do some DNA work. So I'll be looking at the diet of the species and then comparing, using light traps, the availability of these prey items inside and outside to see if there is a difference. And then my final chapter is really looking at whether there is a conservation benefit outside as well. The difference between inside and outside, using, again, very large acoustic arrays at incremental increasing distance from the reserve, to see if we sort of see this hotspot of activity inside, which declines outside. Of course, bats can fly, and they can actually cover some pretty large distances. So it may be that fences are just a blip on their radar. They happen to roost inside there, but they don't really care. But then also looking at feral cats, which has been seen elsewhere as an issue. Of course, if we see that cats are predating on bats in the landscape, then that's a good sign that the reserves are beneficial. And I may come up with more questions than I answer, but I just think it's really important, particularly in these areas that don't get a lot of attention.
We seem to hear quite a bit about fence reserves now. The benefits of them have been quite well recognised in the last decade or more.
Yep.
It seems to be a fairly new tool.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think it wasn't taken up earlier?
I think maybe it comes down to funding and people's awareness of ecology and conservation. I sometimes work for Australian Wildlife Conservancy as well, and I think they cost a huge amount of money, and they cost a huge amount of money to build, but they also cost a lot of money to manage and to keep successful. You've constantly got to be checking them. It's great to see the New South Wales government forming more and more of these things, but they are, one of them is going to be 40,000 hectares, which is just huge. So it's amazing. I think it's also important to remember that nobody sees them as a long-term solution. These threats still exist in the landscape, but I think for now it's fantastic to see that there is this money and focus being put on these areas, because it's really the only thing that we have at the moment. I think it's funding and awareness that has really helped.
And we hear a lot about partnerships in ecology as well. In your plenary today at the ESA conference, you mentioned doing some of your work on, is it wild deserts and in the arid ecology reserve. How important are partnerships, to your research, but also how important do you think partnerships are in successful ecological management?
I think we're seeing a real trend in conservation across Australia for partnerships, whether this is with pastoralists or Aboriginal communities and land, with government. And, I think arid recovery is a prime example. arid recovery is funded by the BHP mine. And usually conservation and mining don't go hand in hand, but it's actually really cool. I haven't spent a huge amount of time there, but going out there and seeing how well run it is and how good the relationship seems to be between the mine and the conservation. And similarly with my work with AWC, these new relationships with pastoralists, I think the only way that we can really have conservation on a broad scale is working with people that maybe traditionally would butt heads with conservationists. A lot of these people on the ground do care. You know, they still want to continue with their practice, whether it be running cows or whatever. But I think there are ways that it can be done better. A lot of the areas that are, of course, of interest to conservationists often aren't actually the areas that are of interest to pastoralists or maybe to the mine. So yeah, I think it's really cool to see that people are working together.
And for yourself, you're partway through your PhD. Do you feel that you will continue to work with bats far into the future, or do you see yourself branching out?
I think if you ask anyone that knows me, they'll probably say I have a fairly unhealthy relationship with bats. I'm a little bit obsessed. Sometimes I'm putting up bat boxes and then working on videos of bats whilst writing a PhD on bats and discussing bats at work. So yeah, for now I'm pretty comfortable. I think bats are niche, but they are the second most diverse order of mammals. There's over 1,400 species globally. So they're niche, but they're also extremely diverse, and there's a lot of research questions out there. So yeah, I think since moving to Australia, I've only been here a couple of years, and it's been amazing to learn about bilbies and booties and woylies and all the other things that you have around, the small jumpy things, as well as all the amazing bird life. But yeah, bats have always just have a very sort of strong place in my heart as well, and I do a lot of rescue work with Bat Conservation Rescue Queensland when I'm actually at home. Yeah, so I think for now I'll stick with them, but it's great to obviously incorporate everything, and that's the beauty of ecology, is that it's so interconnected.
Ecology Matters is a podcast by the Ecological Society of Australia, a not-for-profit organisation supporting ecologists and ecological science in Australia. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. To learn more about our work, follow us on social media, visit our website or sign up to our newsletter. You can find links to these in the show notes. The theme music is Glow by Scott Buckley. Lastly, thank you to all the ecologists who have taken part in this series and shared their perspectives on why ecology matters.